I'm an American, and as an American, you hear some pretty weird claims from foreigners about what they see Americans to be like. Like, for some reason, they seem to assume that all we eat is burgers, dude. Like, I don't get it. No, but for real, there's a lot of stereotypes about America and Americans because our media is shoved in almost everyone's faces, at least in the Western world. So I thought it would be fun to do a video where we take a look at some of them, especially the ones that are just wrong. For the record, by the way, this is just really convenient timing, and this inspired me to do this video. But let's start with that one. So, one of the first stereotypes you hear about Americans is that we only eat burgers and grills and etc. Now, I may not be the average American, but I never actually had a burger until I was about 19. I hated it. I didn't find a burger I liked until I was about 20, I think. And even then, I'm from New York, so my favorite food's pizza, let's get real. But on the topic of food, I noticed Americans have two different stereotypes that I've heard from overseas. The first one is that Americans are all fat, but the second one is that Americans are all obsessed with fitness. I mean, either way, none of them fit me. I don't exercise, and I only weigh 105 pounds. Another set of conflicting but funny stereotypes is you hear how Americans are all workaholics. We all put the whole day into our jobs, more than the whole day. We just make hours to put into our jobs. We never stop working. We're so focused on our career and advancement and just putting all of our effort into this like narrow-sighted tunnel of a life. And then on the other side, you hear people say we're lazy. Another set of stereotypes that just can't exist together. I don't think either of those really apply to me. I think that I'm somewhere in between. Now, these are two more stereotypes as well. One is that we're all like, we can get real heated during politics and like real just emotional and passionate and like in a bad way. But at the same time, one thing you also hear about Americans is that they're apathetic and they don't care about politics and they don't want to vote and they don't even want to hear about it. God, this country has a lot of really conflicting stereotypes, doesn't it? I have websites open, by the way, to help me figure out what some American stereotypes are. This one I've heard of, that Americans are loud and obnoxious. I'm from New York, so that's definitely true for me. But for most Americans, I wouldn't say that's true. Most people I know are relatively moderate or quiet. New Yorkers though, oh man, we're loud as fuck. Every American owns a gun. That's actually not true. In a lot of states, it's really hard to get a gun, even in America. There's a lot of guns, but they're centered around pretty much the same people. Not even like half, only about a third of Americans either have a gun or live with someone that has a gun. So it's not as common as you think.
Hey, Rez, there's a hornet nest in the backyard.
Why don't you take it down then?
With what?
Will this work?
Maybe? Got anything else?
Let's see here. How about this?
Yeah.
Alright, there you go. Anyway, as I was saying.
Hey, Rez?
Yes?
Dante has show and tell today. You got anything?
Oh, I know. How about this?
Yeah, that'll do.
There you go.
Rez?
What is it?
One last thing. Wife and I's going shopping. You need anything?
No, but make sure she brings this.
Yeah, America.
There you go. More common than in most countries, with the exception of certain like European countries, for example, like ones living alongside Russia or Switzerland. They have a lot more guns per person. Now, this one's more of a myth than a stereotype. I'm not even sure how this started. For some reason, there's this like stereotype or whatever that all Americans use the imperial system. I don't know a single person in America that uses the imperial system. As a little background, our government for decades now has used the metric system and uses it in all governmental buildings. The general population, though, has never used the imperial system. After we got free from, England, United Kingdom, Great Britain, whatever they would call it back then, the imperial system didn't even exist yet. It was the English system. There were English units. America changed a whole lot of things, removed some measurements, added some measurements, and pretty much changed almost every measurement while keeping similar names in some cases, like foot and yard. But for example, if you buy a gallon here or a gallon in the United Kingdom or Canada, where the imperial system is still somewhat used, you're going to get two completely different amounts of liquid. The actual system we use for measurements is called the US customary system. We've used this system since pretty much we became independent. We have never used the imperial system. It was created after we were created. We will never use the imperial system. I don't know why. It's not even from foreigners. Like, even Americans, for some reason, seem to think we use the imperial system. I don't know how you can get through all of school and come out not knowing what measurement system you use. Now, another one I've heard, and the best part is I've heard this one from people that hate the United States. I've heard both of these from people that hate the United States, and they'll use both of them as like an insult, but they can't coexist. Number one, all Americans are rude, and number two, Americans are too polite. This is another set that I don't really think applies to me. I don't think I'm particularly rude. I don't think I'm particularly polite. I think I'm just somewhere in the middle ground, as all people should be. Another one is that we apparently all like sports. And this is funny because this also conflicts with the lazy one, how we're supposedly all like couch potatoes, but we all love sports and will fill stadiums up completely to a state of basically being overpacked. Again, neither of those really apply to me. I don't like sports, and I almost never sit on that couch. One stereotype I've heard a lot from people that are in Eastern Europe especially is that Americans are all rich, that this country is just rich. Everyone is rich, the streets are made of gold, and everyone walks around with their pet Lamborghini. As someone who's under the poverty line and constantly struggles to pay both rent and all the medical bills for my long list of medical issues, and stands no chance at surviving in an apartment by myself, I think you might want to reconsider that one. I know a lot of American stereotypes are basically California, LA. For most people that live in other countries, everything they seem to think about America is what you see in California. And this is an issue because America is not just literally the size of a continent, but it's so spread out. You go from Florida to Alaska to Hawaii to Puerto Rico, you'll find the most stupidly diverse set of cultures. You could go from one end of Europe to the other end of Europe and still not see as many differences in culture, people, thought process, and lifestyles as you would going from one end of the United States to the other end of the United States to the other end, especially going into like territories as well if the states weren't different enough. And now this one isn't really like a personal stereotype, but this is one of those misconceptions that I just hear so much, and that is when talking about the military of the United States. There's actually two of them. The first one is that apparently we spend all of our money on our military. Meanwhile, our biggest budgetary item is healthcare. Which is also funny because another stereotype you hear is that Americans don't have good healthcare, and that, you know, it's just you're out by yourself, and if you have a bill, you know, it's all on you. Meanwhile, most of our government spending goes into healthcare. It goes into lowering prices, to providing equipment, especially for government hospitals, providing complete medical coverage to all of our elderly citizens, Medicaid, Medicare, etc., including some plans for people that are younger. The second misconception, like stereotype of our military, is actually more historical, and that is when it comes to the greatest, like, defeat that the US has ever suffered. Now, depending who you ask, I notice you'll get different answers. If you ask most Americans or Europeans, what they'll tell you is it was the Vietnam War. If you ask Canadians, they'll tell you it was the War of 1812. In reality, one of those ended with a white peace where all borders were restored to their original position with nothing conceded on either side, and the other was settled on the highest international level where the side that was not the US called the war, promised to stop, and basically gave the victory up. Now, can you guess which one is which? I'll give you 5 seconds. The White Peace was the War of 1812. It was fought against the British, although if you ask Canadians, they'll say it was Canada, even though Canada didn't achieve full independence until about 50 years ago, I think 40 years ago. And the side where the other side gave up the victory was actually Vietnam. I've seen people try to explain this to people generally, and the most common response I've heard against this is, oh yeah, you won. That's why you left and just didn't tell them you won. Because there seems to be this misconception that the Vietnam War ended with the US leaving and just letting South Vietnam fight until they died. And that the US just pulled out and just that was it. There's this misconception that it was a retreat or like a we're done here kind of thing. When in actuality, just days before the end of the war, Americans had pulled off the biggest victory in the entire war, destroyed basically most of the remnants of the enemy army, that being, North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. After that major defeat, North Vietnam agreed to go with South Vietnam and the US to the UN, and a deal was worked out where North Vietnam would stop trying to invade its neighbors, South Vietnam would cease hostilities, everyone would get to keep their kind of original borders, and to restore peace and stability in the region, the United States would help replace the losses of the sides, especially of South Vietnam. And that's how the Vietnam War ended. Both South Vietnam and North Vietnam still existed. For some reason, people seem to think it ended with the death of South Vietnam for some reason. It was only years later that North Vietnam went back on their word, and without any Soviet support and without US intervention, decided to invade their neighbors again. At this point, the attention of the superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, had moved completely elsewhere, and it was just kind of ignored. I don't actually know where the misconception started. I don't know what year it started, because I know it wasn't immediate. It wasn't even in the first 10 years after the second invasion happened a few years later. I think it's more of like a past 20 years kind of thing that for some reason people had just mixed up such a recent event. In actuality, the biggest single military defeat you can find in US history, I'll let you guess this one too. Did you guess it? It was Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor pretty much ranks up there as one of the worst naval defeats, not just in the US, but in all of world history. There's worse ones, like the giant British fleet getting burned by a bunch of rowboats and other smaller ships with people holding torches and setting their flammable giant battleships on fire. But in modern history, aside from some of the defeats that Japan suffered, Pearl Harbor is probably one of the worst, in the top 5 probably, naval defeats in the past 100 years. Another interesting stereotype and kind of misconception is that Americans live like these excessive lifestyles and that they don't respect nature or something, and that we disregard the effect that the things we do have on the planet. Meanwhile, if you actually look at the trend of carbon emissions per countries in the world, America has had a nearly 20% decrease in carbon emissions since 2005. This is mainly because since the year 2000, we've vastly decreased our usage of coal for energy. We've switched to using basically no oil at all for energy. We've instead increased our usage of cleaner alternatives such as gas and renewables. Percentage-wise, it is the single largest decrease of carbon emissions out of every country in the entire world. So it doesn't really fit the stereotype. I'm not sure I understand that one. And that reminds me of a good one. It's actually more of a misconception about America itself or the American government. It's more of a meme now than a stereotype, but I know there's been this long-lasting stereotype that America just really wants oil. Like, oh, you have oil? We're gonna invade you for it. We need oil. But meanwhile, the United States has the most untapped reserves of oil out of any and every country in existence. We're not even necessarily like an oil importer anymore. We've actually, during the Trump administration at least, jacked up our production of oil so that we're not just essentially self-sufficient on oil in active production as well as our reserves. We've actually started exporting oil to other countries. One of the most fun American stereotypes though, patriotism. Flags everywhere. Star-Spangled Banner playing from the rooftops. Tanks driving down the street. An M4 in every cradle and an A10 at every airport. Is it true? Kind of. Minus some of those last parts. But yes, America is very patriotic. Not just like quietly patriotic, like yeah, we love this place, let's clean it up. But very loudly and obnoxiously patriotic. I know some foreigners use it as an insult, but I love it. Anyway, I think that's enough of these to make a video. This was kind of fun to make, and it was fun to read some of these, because I didn't actually know some of these, and the conflicting ones made it even better. Are you an American? Do any of these apply to you? Which ones didn't apply to you? And which one of these small facts I've thrown in there did you not know yet? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys on another video. Bye-bye. These are my ribs. Does this look fat to you? Do I look fat to you? Ribs.